Yeshua told a lot of parables. We all know that. And one time he told a parable about a lost coin. This coin was lost, and when it was found, the woman who found it rejoiced, told her neighbors, everyone rejoiced, "Oh, you found your coin." Now, the coin was never really lost. It was just misplaced. It was always there. It wasn't that like it just disappeared. So what is it about the Gospels that we're missing? Where are those lost coins that we can find, and who can help them find us? Well, we're going to introduce you to two gentlemen who can do that. Nehemiah Gordon, Keith Johnson, welcome.
Shalom, Scott. It's
Shalom.
great to be here.
And you guys are talking about something, or rather starting a new project you have, not really, relatively new, I guess, called the Hebrew Gospel Pearls.
We're continuing a project we've called the Hebrew Gospel Pearls.
Yeah.
We started it when the pandemic broke out, when we were locked at home, and we decided, you know what, we've been talking about this for many, many years, about eventually one day when we have time getting to this project, and we decided to do it. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about it, because it really started with Michael Rood coming to me and asking me a question about Matthew 23. And I looked at all the manuscripts I had available. I looked at all the Greek manuscripts I could find that I had access to, and I didn't solve the problem that he had approached me with in Matthew 23. Then I looked at a Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew, preserved by Jewish rabbis through the Middle Ages, and it completely changed everything. There was a difference of one single letter in the Hebrew versus the Greek. And when I say the Greek, I mean if you translated the Greek back into Hebrew, it would translate one way. And when you looked at the Hebrew Matthew preserved by these Jewish rabbis, it read something slightly different, difference of one single letter that changed this from a contradiction between Matthew 15 and Matthew 23. And in some respect, between everything Yeshua taught in Matthew 23.
Really?
That one single letter made everything fall into place and brought coherence to his message. And I ended up writing a book about it. The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus.
Ah, we know that one. Yes.
You know, I wrote this book now over 15 years ago, and it's still the best-selling book of anything I've ever written. It's been translated into more languages than all of my other books combined. It's been translated into Spanish, traditional Chinese, Serbo-Croatian, Icelandic, Urdu, Korean, Lithuanian. The video was translated into Russian. And the reason that it's been translated into all these languages is it really unlocks some really important things in Yeshua's teaching, and all that based on one single letter. It's the single letter that brought everything into line. I can't say it changed his message, because this was his message all along, and everywhere else in the Gospels you read, it had a certain message. And then Matthew 23 was like that, a wrench you throw into the gears, and they all get ground up, and you're like, what is Matthew 23 doing? And in the Hebrew Matthew, it made perfect sense. So what Keith and I decided to do is to look for those, as you call them, the lost coins. We call them the pearls, Hebrew Gospel Pearls. They're these little nuggets, these little pearls. It's not to replace the Greek. It's not to throw out the Greek. It's to say there's another witness. Scholars talk about it as textual witnesses. We have another witness, which is the Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew. What can we learn about the original message of Yeshua from that? And I'm coming at this as a textual scholar. Keith is now a former Methodist pastor, coming from the Christian background, and we're coming at it from these two different perspectives and saying, what is it that Yeshua taught in the first century based on the Greek, and comparing that with the Hebrew.
Interesting stuff. So now we've talked about this. Well, Michael and you and Keith have talked about this before, right on this stage. But what is different now? Because you're starting to get into some new things, and there's some exciting new stuff coming up. So tell us about what's going on here.
So I'll give Keith a chance.
Can I let the cat out of the bag, Scott?
I don't know. Do we dare?
Don't do it.
Let me tell you why this changes literally everything. And first of all, I want to thank you all, thank Michael and Rood Awakening for inviting us back. We did in the beginning of season 1, we called it the launch of Hebrew Gospel Pearls. Michael did a great job of allowing us to talk about the background, and that's you guys is a site that we basically I think we did that around Shavuot, Nehemiah, if I'm thinking right.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
In terms of what was happening, the background, so they can get all the background at A Rude Awakening. But something changed, and what changed is that we did season 1, and I think we did a really good job of season 1. And then Nehemiah gave me a phone call, and he always does this, Scott. He keeps raising the bar. So how did he raise the bar this time? He gives me a call and he says, Keith, I'm going to do something that I've been wanting to do for years. I'm going to take the first section. What's the first section? People can open their Bibles right now to Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. And that's the famous Sermon on the Mount where he talks about the Beatitudes, the things that, blessed, the blessed, the blessed, the blessed. So Nehemiah says to me, Keith, I'm going to do something radical. I said, what's that? And I got to be honest with you, Scott. When he told me this, I have not come down from my excitement. Basically, what he was going to do is he's going to take all the manuscripts that he had access to. There were 28, but there were 20 that had this section in it. And he went letter by letter looking at the manuscripts. He transcribed all of those 20 manuscripts for this one section, Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. He calls me up. He says, okay, we're ready to do this episode. Here's what happened. It's a cat out of the bag. We start the episode. We're in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. We get to Matthew chapter 5, verse 2, and we've already spent over an hour just talking about the significant things that have been found background-wise. We realize, Scott, that as a result of what Nehemiah has made available, I'm looking at this transcription of all these 20 manuscripts. He's looking at it. We're now looking at the same information together because for decades he's had this in his vault. You understand? This has been he's had these manuscripts in his vault. Hebrew Gospel Pros have allowed him to bring what's in his vault, make it available. We're looking at it, and everything changed. We decided at that point we cannot rush through what I call the biblical Beatitudes. We have gone verse by verse, beatitude by beatitude, looking at all the manuscripts, and what we have found is life-changing to me. Because here's my big statement that's controversial. There's so many people who have an idea of Jesus. This is what they tell me about Jesus. But the words of Yeshua, language, history, and context are radical. This is why most pastors don't preach his words. And I got to tell you something. What we're looking at right now is it's life changing. That's all I can say. Nehemiah can give you some more background, but I had to get that in because it really has already changed my life, and I have been reading the Gospels for decades.
Well, and just to we did season 1, which was Matthew chapters 1 through 4, and a lot of what we did was historical background. He comes to Capernaum. Where's Capernaum? We found the synagogue of Capernaum, the archaeology. I don't think we even had time to even get to everything I wanted to bring, but a lot of it was historical background. Matthew 5 through 7 is what they call the Sermon on the Mount, and the first 12 verses they call the Beatitudes, from the Greek beati, which means blessed. And it's, blessed is this group and blessed is this other people. And there's a Hebrew context to all of that. There's a movie they made years ago, and it was it was a parody, but it wasn't. In some respects, it was being in some ways it was disrespectful. In other ways, it was trying to be respectful. And it has these people standing way in the back at the Sermon on the Mount. And they hear, and Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And one turns to another and says, "Cheesemakers? What's so special about cheesemakers? Why are they being blessed?" And the other says, "Well, no, he doesn't mean cheesemakers per se. He means all professions who are artisans." And they were, it was a comedy, right? But it was actually kind of profound, right? It reminds me of the Jewish joke about don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, where it says 3 times, "Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo," and the rabbis say, why does it say it 3 times? Because it means 3 different things. That's actually what they say. That's not a joke. That's a fact. They say it means don't eat meat and milk together. Well, who said anything about meat and milk? We said a kid in its mother's milk. But they say it's broader categories. Don't eat meat and milk together. Don't even cook them together. Don't benefit from them cooked together. Don't benefit means you can't even feed them to your dog. So the joke is Moses is up on Mount Sinai and God says, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, what did you mean by that? Oh, you mean if I can't eat milk together. And God says, Moses, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. What do you mean by that? Oh, you mean have separate dishes for meat and for milk, which is what Orthodox Jews do. Moses, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Oh, you mean after I eat meat, I have to wait 6 hours until I eat milk, which is what Orthodox Jews do. And finally, God says, whatever you want. And it's a joke, but there's something profound about these jokes that there were people standing there hearing Yeshua preach. And then the disciples then went and they taught those things that he had preached, and they recorded what he said. You know, Keith and I did a book together called A Prayer to Our Father, in which we looked for the place where Yeshua taught the Sermon on the Mount. And it was kind of obvious, right, Keith? I mean, we know, and every tourist gets on a bus, they're loaded on the bus, and they're taken to the place called Mount of the Beatitudes. I mean, what more do you want? It's called Mount of the Beatitudes, right? There's a Catholic church on the top of the
well, that seals it right there. I mean,
there's the vestments that Pope John Paul II, or wherever it was, wore. Special vestments he wore just when he came to that particular church on that particular mountain. Obviously, that's the spot the whole world knows. Except we looked into history, and we found that throughout history, that's a very late comer. That doesn't show up until 1938 as the spot, which is accepted, at least, as where Yeshua, that's when the church was built, funded by Mussolini, of all people. And so it's kind of a Johnny-come-lately. So we went around to the 5 different spots that had been proposed throughout history where Yeshua could have taught the Sermon on the Mount, and some of them didn't fit at all, right? It was like a mountain where it's, 1,000 feet down. Okay, I mean, that's not realistic. Unless he had a bullhorn, or if he was speaking with some supernatural voice, which, Christians can believe, but that's not what it says, right? So you're left with the most likely spot being what's called the Horns of Hattin, where Keith and I have gone, and he went up to the top and he talked out to me like this, not even shouting, and I could hear him like hundreds of feet off. It was really cool. It's like this natural amphitheater. But when we wrote the book, we sent it to a professor that, or a scholar that Keith knew, let's put it that way. And his response was, and this was a very learned man, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. I'll let Keith tell the story.
No. I mean, I think you go ahead. It's okay.
Here's what I remember from the story, and this was over 10 years ago, so I hope I'm getting this right. But what I remember is him saying, well, that's not where Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount. It's this other place. I have the souvenir that I bought in the gift shop there.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, it gets worse.
Oh, it's
he
worse.
actually said,
well, there's a second half of it as well.
Scholar,
what's that?
He said, actually what he said, Scott, is he said, listen, Jesus didn't teach the Sermon on the Mount at a place. Matthew did it in his library. Right.
Well, and that was, he said that as well. But remember, he had the rock from Tabgha or Tabcha, which is where it's, it's the traditional Catholic spot where they fed the 5,000. And he said, well, that would have been the spot if anywhere. But in reality, he didn't really teach a sermon. Well, what do you mean he didn't teach a sermon? Well, there were different people who had followed him for a decade or for however long it was. They'd followed him during his ministry, a year, 3.5 years. And years later, Matthew sat down, or whoever sat down, some anonymous person, and collected these different traditions and telescoped them into a single event. That's basically what he was saying, right?
Yeah.
He was saying, come on, let's not be immature children. There wasn't actually an event called the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, even in the New Testament, it's not called the Sermon on the Mount, but
Sure.
this event that's described in Matthew 5:7 is a compilation of many different sermons he gave, perhaps over years or months or weeks, and they were telescoped, it's called, into a single event. This is what the evangelical Christian scholar was telling the Jewish man, and I'm like, well, I mean, if you don't believe it, well, let's all go home. Like, what are we wasting? Like, what are you talking about? What I'm looking at is I'm trying to understand it in its historical context, Keith.
Nehemiah was like, had the childlike faith, and this guy's like, no, you've got too much faith for that.
Well, and
I want to say something, because if people don't know, they might be listening to us for the first time and hearing about this, and they're like, are you going to, I have to tell this story about my mother-in-law. She heard I was doing this project, and she got very concerned. And she looked at me and she said, are you going to take away my favorite verse?
Ooh.
I said, what do you mean? If you get to my favorite verse, if you and Nehemiah mess around with my favorite verse and pull the rug out from under me, I'm going to be very, very upset.
Look, and I have this image of... Sorry.
And what I was telling her is, wouldn't you want to know if we could bring to you language, history, and context, especially if it's based on the Tanakh that Yeshua's, that's why I call it the biblical Beatitudes, just that one section. It's amazing, Scott, how much we find in what I call the big book that he's actually preaching. So I said to her, wouldn't you want to know, if you knew language, history, and context, that it matched? She says, yes, if it doesn't mess with my tradition.
So you know what? Yeah.
And I got to say something. There's a lot of people, obviously, that do get nervous because they feel like we're touching the sacred cow. I went to a seminary that taught me that Greek is the inspired language. I studied Greek. I went through all that, and it's been very, very helpful as we're now going through the Greek. But here's where this changes. This is where the game changes. If you go and you look at those manuscripts, there's many Jewish people, many Jewish scholars who could read them but don't really care about them. There's many Christian scholars who care about them but can't read them. We found someone who has both. Nehemiah actually cares about it, and he can read it. And what he's done that's so phenomenal, and this is what Michael got him to do years ago, and now we're bringing it at an even larger level, he's now giving access to that ability to read it and put it in a form so that we can share it with the world. And I'm going to tell you, the first season, how many people have listened and how many people have told us it's changed their life. It's been amazing. This particular section I'm excited about because, again, we're getting a chance to slow down beatitude by beatitude. And I'm telling you, Scott, I can't even tell you. It's just amazing. It's just literally amazing.
You do a lot of health stuff, Scott, obviously. And I have this image of maybe your average Christian is standing there at the carnival, and he's holding his cotton candy and he's eating it. And in some ways, like, this cotton candy is what he thought the teachings of Jesus were. And you come along with your health teaching and you whack it out of his hand and you say, that cotton candy isn't healthy. And he's all upset. Don't take away my cotton candy. But instead of cotton candy, you can give him steak. You can give him, or whatever you think the healthiest food is, avocado, right? You can give him some really healthy fats, things that will nourish him. And he says, but I'll eat the avocado, but don't mess with my cotton candy. And, years ago, I heard this lecture from a scholar of New Testament studies, and he pointed out something that really struck me. It stuck with me. It was profound. He mentioned the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed is recited in many churches. It's accepted by, I think, most mainstream churches. And I'm not knocking the Nicene Creed. What we're coming to do is to fill in the blanks that aren't covered. So it goes like this. It's talking about Jesus. It says, he became incarnate by the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and was made human. He was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. He suffered and was buried. The third day he rose again according to the scriptures. And this scholar years ago pointed out, what's missing from this? And, you know, everyone's silent. I don't know what's missing. That's the core of Christianity, isn't it? But what's missing is everything from he was made human until he was crucified.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Everything between those middle chapters of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is missing. And you know, I can't say what's going on in most churches, but I speak to a lot of Christians. And I remember speaking years ago to this one woman who I've shared the story before, who was a Christian, who all she knew of Christianity, her Christianity was Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ. And she told me in her church, the pastor doesn't bore us with the Bible. He tells us stories about life. And I realized she doesn't know everything between he was made human and he was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
You know, that's what Michael believes the same thing. I'm sure you guys are aware of that new poster Michael's made called The New Apostles' Creed.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
It's brilliant, and it says right in the middle of it, we believe. It almost looks like a Declaration of Independence type of thing, and it really is. And it's all the stuff in between. Yeshua died, you know, he was born of a virgin, but he also did this, he also did that. He's mentioned from Genesis to Revelation. This is what he wants you to do. This is how I live my life. This is what I believe. And it's meant for believers to put on their wall for people who come in their house and say, what do you believe? They can turn to it and say, that's what I believe, right there.
Now, what I can't do, I'm coming as a Jew who's a textual scholar. I'm not telling people what to believe and what not to believe. You beliefs you work out for yourself in fear and trembling with prayer and study before the creator of the universe. If you have questions about doctrine, talk to your pastor, rabbi, or priest. Don't talk to me. What I can do as a textual scholar is say, okay, everything between those two events, he was made human, he was crucified, meaning the things he actually taught, I actually have some insight into that. One of the things that we bring during our series, which is, I'm so excited about it, is I have a second cousin 5 times removed who lived in the 1800s, who wrote what is considered to be the first Jewish commentary on the New Testament.
Wow.
And we now have that book. It was written in Hebrew, translated into French, and now it's been translated into English. I actually have the Hebrew original as well. And we're using that as an accompaniment to our series, The Hebrew Gospel Pearls, on NehemiahWall.com and Biblical Foundations Academy, BFAinternational.com. And it's just really exciting hearing my perspective, Keith's perspective, the perspective of this Jew who lived over 100 years ago, and modern Jewish scholars as well. We're hearing many different voices.
Amazing. Well, we're going to get more into this in just a second. So, Keith, hang on to that thought. I know you wanted to say something, so let's hang on. We're just going to give our folks here just a couple of minutes because, you know, to bring Nehemiah in, to bring Keith in, it costs funds. That's just the way the world works. That's what we have to do. And it's to you, we want to say thank you because you make this show possible. You make Shabbat Night Live possible. There are no corporate sponsors or anything like that. So we want to thank you for making this possible. And do me a favor, would you make this possible for other folks to watch in the future, whether they see it on YouTube or wherever, if they decide to get the DVD or they get it from you or wherever. We need to make that possible now into the future. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to think about it, pray about it, a couple of minutes here to donate to this ministry and to thank these guys for coming here because we'd like to bless them as they go to their next destination. Thanks.